of the tank on the Second World War Western Front. I'm going to turn you over to my executive officer, First Lieutenant Gil Eastland.
So we have a problem. We have a German firing that machine gun in that pillbox, and we have to knock it out. We do have a solution, and that's right behind me, the Sherman M4A3 Sherman tank. Excellent tank. It weighs 32 tons. It travels at 26 miles an hour. It has a crew of 5, and they are protected by armor in this vehicle with 3 inches in the front, 2 inches all the way around. On the turret, it has 3 inches in the front and 2 inches all the way around with an inch on top. She carries 2 machine guns, usually a 50 caliber machine gun, and she also carries a 30 caliber machine gun, and she also carries a special gun on this one. Now, there were 40,000 Sherman tanks made during the war. There were 500 of these tanks during the war. This one is carried very special 105 millimeter howitzer. And that howitzer is just perfect for knocking out that pillbox. And we're going to let you hear it do it right now.
Yeah.
The M4A3 Sherman tank. He'll give you a nice edge on the battlefield. Here comes Captain Hunt.
One thing armored warfare isn't is quiet. Tanks do not sneak up on anybody. You always know they're coming. And for the frontline infantrymen, that was generally a very unpleasant situation. The enemy tanks, when they attacked us, usually struck us at a point where our own tanks and our own anti-tank guns were nowhere to be found. And a soldier with no more armor than his wool shirt was unlikely to overcome an attack by enemy armor. That was a problem the United States Army needed to solve, and it solved it in 1942 by inventing a new class of weapon, and that is the infantryman's anti-tank rocket launcher, nicknamed the bazooka in World War II. This is a very simple weapon. It's a long, hollow steel tube that has 2 electrical posts on the back of it that are connected to a trigger. It's a crew-served weapon, so you have the gunner who carries the bazooka, you have the loader who carries the ammunition. When the time comes to operate the weapon, what the loader does is he takes out a rocket, he inserts it into the back of the bazooka, removes and uncoils 2 electrical wires which he attaches to the post. When he taps the gunner on the head, the gunner knows that the rocket is connected. The gunner squeezes a trigger which sends an electrical current through the wire to the post, and that is what ignites the rocket and fires the bazooka. This thing has an effective range of about 300 yards. When the bazooka first showed up in the battlefields of Tunisia in 1943, it could knock out almost any German tank. It was a great shock to the enemy. The Germans, of course, captured bazookas. They reverse engineered them, built their own, improved upon it to make the grandfather of today's rocket-propelled grenade. The bazooka, by the time the American Army gets into Europe in 1944, can only knock out light or medium German tanks. It can no longer penetrate the armor on heavy German tanks like the Panther and the Tiger. It doesn't mean the bazooka couldn't kill them. It could. It just took very brave bazooka crews who would maneuver to fire from the side of the tank and hit its track and immobilize it, or to get behind the tank and hit its engine compartment from the rear. Either shot, if it was successful, would stop the tank from running. A tank that doesn't run is a sitting target on the battlefield, and it would be abandoned by its crew. American soldiers, of course, were very adapted fellows. They figured out the bazookas could do more than attack enemy armor. They could strike at enemy troops in buildings, bunkers, and pillboxes as well. And it's in this bunker busting role that we're going to demonstrate the bazooka for you here today. So our bazooka team is over here on the left. Their target is the berm just to the other side of that pillbox, and demonstrate your weapon. All right, we have a misfire there. We apologize for that. But the bazooka really changes the nature of the frontline battle, because now the infantryman is able to kill the tank. The tank can no longer roam about the battlefield impervious to enemy fire any longer. Now the tank itself needs protection from these handheld anti-tank weapons, and the only way that he can get that protection is from the infantry. So now the infantry has to find a way to keep up with the tank. I can walk about 2.5 miles per hour. The tank runs 26 miles per hour. So we have to have a vehicle that allows the infantry to stick with the tanks. That vehicle is what Lieutenant Eastland is going to talk to you about next.
That vehicle is the M4A1 half-track. It's a great piece of equipment, very versatile. Half-track carries a crew of 5, has armor around the half-track of only about 1/4 inch. She weighs about 9 tons, but she runs 40 miles an hour on the highway. Very versatile piece of equipment. You can carry troops in it, you can carry different types of arms in it, you can carry wounded in it, you can do everything you want to do with this half-track. But this is a special half-track because it also carries the M1 81mm mortar. Mortar's a smooth bore, loaded weapon. It shoots this piece of ordnance right here, the M43A1. We're going to show you what it shoots like right now. M4A1 Camper. It's Sunday. We're going to praise the Lord, and we're going to pass the ammunition.
So thus far, all the weapon systems that we've talked about have been designed to strike the enemy at long range, several hundred yards at least. The job of frontline combat troops, however, is to close with the enemy and then take and hold ground. And once you get into close quarters combat, you need different types of weapon systems to maximize your effectiveness. And one of the best weapons the American GI had for close quarters combat in World War II is also one of the most recognizable and one of the most famous, the Mark II fragmentation grenade. We've all seen these things used in the movies, right? How many of you have watched John Wayne, Chuck Norris, or Arnold Schwarzenegger pull that ring out with his teeth, throw this 300 yards, and blow the enemy out of a tree in a small atomic explosion? Yeah, we've all seen that movie, right? Well, real life is very different. This ring is connected to a cotter pin that stretches through the head and spoon of the grenade. Cotter pin is bent on the other side. It is your safety device. You do not want it to come out easily. If it came out easily like John Wayne's grenade, I've got this on my web gear. We're walking through these woods. A vine grabs the ring, pulls out the pin. This falls between my legs. 5 seconds later, I get what's called the negative entry in my health record. You try and pull that ring out with your teeth, the teeth come out, the ring stays in place. That's why we have dentists in the medical corps to deal with the people who imagine that they're John Wayne. You better understand how to really use your weapon. You take this spoon, which is spring-loaded, put it in the palm of your hand and squeeze very tight. Then you prime the cotter pin by bending the ears straight, put your finger in the ring, pull the cotter pin out. Now the only thing that holds this spring-loaded spoon in place is the pressure of your hand. When that pressure is released, the spoon jumps off the grenade, hits and lights an igniter that starts a 5-second fuse. 5 seconds later, this thing is going to blow up, and nothing in the world is going to stop it. When it explodes, each one of these squares that give this thing its distinctive shape and its nickname, the pineapple grenade, each one of those squares is supposed to become a fragment, whirling through the air at flesh-ripping, man-killing velocity. You've got 5 seconds. You hold it for 3 seconds before you throw it. You count 1001, 1002, 1003, because if you throw it right away, the enemy has time to pick it up and throw it back at you. So the whole time that you're standing there holding this lit and sputtering grenade, you're hoping and praying like crazy that the person who worked the graveyard shift at that defense plant back in the States 6 months ago was paying attention that night and really cut you a 5 and not a 4 or a 3 second fuse. After 3 seconds, you lob the grenade. You do not throw this like a baseball. You try and throw this like a baseball, it's going to go about 10 yards, and we'll type a negative entry in the health record again. So you use your left arm as an aiming stake, and you lob this like you would throw a shot put. If you're fighting in the woods or the jungle, you don't even lob it, you pitch it underhand like a softball. Try any other method, and I'll promise you, even if there's only one significant size tree within 20 yards of you, you'll manage to hit it, and this will come bouncing back in your direction. Now, the average GI can lob this thing about 30 yards. It has a blast radius of 25 yards. So you throw it and duck. It's as dangerous to you as it is to your opponent. But if your enemy's around a corner, in a trench or shell hole, this is going to do excellent service. The one thing it's not going to do is blow the turret off of a tank, not going to collapse a building, nor is it going to generate a mushroom cloud. Grenades are much more modest weapons than that, and we're going to let you see one in operation. So Private Johnson is going to advance. He's going to throw his grenade into the shell hole right in front of the pillbox, and you'll see what a grenade really does. No mushroom cloud, but the enemy soldiers inside that shell hole are no longer a threat, and that is the objective. So the grenade was a very useful weapon. It was part of the toolbox that the American soldier had to confront his German opponent on the European battlefield. So now we've laid out all the parts and pieces for you. We want to bring them together and talk about how the vehicles and the weapons were used by the troops to win battles against the Germans in World War II. The German army in World War II was a very good army. It had been fighting for several years before the United States got involved in the conflict. It was well armed, it was well trained, it was well disciplined, it was generally well led. German army was made up of veterans who knew their business. But by the time that the Americans got onto the European continent in mid-1944, the German army was an army on the retreat. The Americans were advancing. And this meant that the Germans were fighting a defensive war. And that confers certain advantages because the enemy could very often select the time and the place where he wanted to make a stand, and he would make that stand where the terrain and the circumstances of the battle favored him, not his allied opponent. And what you have here behind me is just such a circumstance. The Germans have dug in on high ground. They have trenches and fortified shell holes. They built concrete pillboxes. In front of those, they put barbed wire obstacles and hedgehog iron anti-tank obstacles to slow down any attacking force and to slow it down and ensnare it on those obstacles within easy range of their weapons. The job of the American soldier was to defeat this very formidable defensive line, and he did that by employing what was known as the combined arms assault. Indirect fire from mortars and artillery, armor and infantry working together to suppress the enemy's fire, to allow the infantry to advance, to close on these positions and take them out in a close assault. So what we're going to do for you here is we're going to show you how one of those things would work. Our German soldiers are in their defenses. You've got an MG-42 in the pillbox. The American infantry has moved forward as close as it can get. We're going to open up with small arms. We're going to bring our mortar half-track out, and we're going to begin launching a barrage against the German position. The Germans, of course, have mortars of their own. They will have a counter barrage fired against the American troops, and under the cover of smoke and the rifle fire here, we will bring out the Sherman tank with the supporting infantry squad. The Americans will fight their way through this zone until they can get close enough to grenade the trench. Once the trench is knocked out, we're going to send a soldier in with a pole charge. 30 pounds of TNT on a long pole with a fuse running down it. He'll attack the pillbox from the rear, which is the only safe place to strike it from. And once he blows the pillbox, the infantry will be able to overrun the enemy position. What we're about to do, we're going to try and make as realistic as we possibly can. These weapons and these vehicles are all actually from World War II. Most of the equipment that we're wearing and carrying is from World War II, and what is not authentic is a very accurate reproduction. The tactics that we're going to demonstrate are those that were taught and employed on the European battlefield. However, there are going to be some differences between this simulation and the real thing. And one of the most important differences is that we're going to compress time and space.